My name's Thornton, and I'm going to be talking to you about cameras, film cameras specifically, and why you should be using them in 2020. I have myself a Praktica TL3, which is my main camera, but I have a lot of other film cameras. I collect them all the way up here. This whole, sorry, my hand went the wrong way. This whole shelf is film cameras and lenses. So why should you be using a film camera in 2020? So we're going to start talking about the pros of having a film camera. I suggest having both. I suggest having a digital camera on one side and then a film camera on the other, so that you can experience the best of both worlds. So the pros of having a film camera are that it's just a lot more tactile. You can feel every single button in your camera. Changing the shutter speed, for example, this little knob here, it's really everything's got a click to it, really. And that I really find appealing myself. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. But being able to, especially the lens, I don't know if you can hear that. Maybe not. But you can hear a clicking from basically everything you've got on your camera. And it kind of gives you a really nice grounded sensation compared to a digital camera where you click on it and it doesn't really give you that gratification of the button clicking sound, you know, the feel of it kind of bouncing back to your finger and everything. You don't get that on digital cameras, and I think that's really a shame. I think it's very beneficial for a photographer to know how to use film cameras and digital cameras, because it really teaches you how to choose your shots wisely. Let's say with a film camera, you have to make sure that your shot is good before you take it, because you've only got a certain number of shots. You've got to remember that each shot you're taking is costing you money, because I know rolls aren't necessarily that expensive depending on what brand you take, but still, as the years go on, you're going to see that price tag go up and up. Each time getting a new roll of film every time you want to take photos is going to be quite expensive in the long run. Another pro for film cameras is that once you've taken your photos, you don't get to see them straight away. That could also be considered a con, but when you get them back after however long it takes you to get them processed, either if you process them yourself or that you get them sent off to a company to process them for you, when you get them back, you get to relive the experience of taking the photo, because you haven't seen your photos when you've taken them. So it's kind of, you're getting the result of your hard work later on at a later date, and I find that really gratifying actually, because you get to remember what it was like to take the photo in the first place. Because when you take a photo on your camera, on your digital camera, yeah, you put it straight on your computer, you edit it, bam, put it on Instagram and it's done. But with film photography it's completely different. You also don't really have that much control over what your picture is going to end up looking like unless you have a specific vision on what film stock you're using. I usually use black and white film stock, because black and white film is a lot cheaper and simpler to process than colour film is. That's because the chemical processes involved in processing your colour film photography and your film stock is completely different and a lot more complicated than it is to do with black and white film photography. Luckily, my cousin's got a black and white darkroom and printing studio in her complex. So I'm able to go over to her place and print all my photos and do it all myself. So I know that some people don't have that sort of luxury, and it's going to be quite difficult to build your own darkroom and printing studio. So getting them sent off to companies that will do it for you is your only option. Another wonderful quality about film photography is the dynamic range is a lot higher on film stock than it is on a digital sensor. So that means you'll be getting a lot more detail in your highlights and in the shadows of your image. So that is your dynamic range, the amount of space between the highest point of detail and the lowest point of detail in your shot. Oh, I almost forgot to mention that just film photography gives its own look. I mean, you can put as much grain, as much scratches on your photography with a digital camera as you want, and you will not replicate the look that film gives you. I'll put some examples on the screen right now, but these are some photos that I've taken with my Praktica TL3, and you can see that they've got this kind of quality to them. They've got this sort of grain that's not too in your face, but it's also subtle and really brings a lot to the image. And it also teaches you about the roots of photography itself. This is how photographers have been doing it forever, until the invention of digital cameras like the one I'm using right now. And knowing where you come from is a brilliant way to know where you're going to be going. So, you've been waiting for it. Now it's time for the cons of having a film camera. Firstly, it's expensive. It really is. If you want to be getting a good camera, a good film camera is going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to cost you nearly as much as a digital camera. And you have to really decide if you're willing to spend that much money on a film camera, because it can't do video, it can't do digital manipulation afterwards on Photoshop or Lightroom, and you really got to figure out if you want to put that much money into film photography. I personally chose the Praktica TL3, and I've got all these other cameras behind me over there, and I got them all from charity shops, stuff like that. They didn't cost me that much. I think I got a batch of like 4 cameras for £70, and it was worth it, I think. They're not in the best condition. I had to do a bit of modification and fixing myself, but I think it's worth it going for a cheaper option than going full on buying a Leica and spending £2,000 on a camera that you can't take video with. Another problem with film cameras is that you don't really get to choose your ISO. When you buy your first roll of film, you'll notice that there's ISO written on it. The ISO of film is basically the sensitivity that that film has to light. And the lower the ISO, the lower the sensitivity, basically. And you don't really have much choice of what situations you can use that film in. For example, you've got something that's ISO 100, you're not going to be able to go out at night and take photos without a lot of difficulty. But something that's more sensitive, you will be able to go into dark situations and take photos anyway. Basically, you're a lot more flexible with a digital camera when it comes to ISO and image sensitivity. Well, I don't know if the lighting in this room has changed much, but if you've noticed that it has, that's because I've just filmed the rest of this video not knowing that my camera wasn't recording. Yep. It do be like that sometimes. But anyway, back to what I was saying. If you don't have your own darkroom, as I was saying earlier, you're gonna have to send off your images to be processed somewhere else. Some companies offer to do that, sometimes even supermarkets offer to process your images for you. Now, the problem with that is you don't have much of a say in what your image is going to turn out looking like, because someone else is doing the processing. You don't have the opportunity to work hands-on developing and printing your images. Getting your hands on a darkroom and being able to process things yourself is always going to be the better option, because you get to do what you want to do, basically. If you can, by all means, go ahead. But I know it's quite difficult. Setting up a room specifically for photography is not everyone's cup of tea, really. Not everyone can do that or has a spare room, so that could be a major con for some of you out there. But last but not least, if you do have access to a darkroom and a processing lab, then you're going to be working with a lot of chemicals. Bear in mind, these chemicals are not good for human consumption. Do not ingest them by any means. And prolonged exposure can be quite harmful to the immune system, so take breaks every now and then. I remember when I was processing my photos, I had to take a couple 1-hour breathers outside to kind of just reset my brain, because I was getting really dizzy in the room because of all the chemical fumes getting into my lungs. But yeah, anyway, that is film photography for you, basically. Those are the pros and the cons that I've just been talking about, and what's left to do is up to you. Do you want to try doing film photography? I highly suggest it, because if you're a photographer who only uses a digital camera, really, you should try picking up a film camera. And same goes the other way. If you're a photographer who only uses film cameras, I don't know why you'd be watching this video, because you already know everything that I just said. But if you only use film cameras, you should also try picking up a digital camera. They both have pros and cons, basically. So basically, just try either digital photography or analog photography. I forgot to mention something. You look really cool taking photos with a camera like this. But anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope I taught you something about film cameras, or maybe digital cameras if it's the other way around. And don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment down below if there's something you didn't understand, or you just want to ask a question, or just chat, whatever. I'll reply to any of them. And I will see you in the next video.